ready for this panel? We're talking policy. Specifically, how can our elected officials move future of work trends in a direction that creates opportunity for all workers? What's government's role in all of this is what we're going to be talking about. In this session, I'm going to be joined by Sarah Comeau. Sarah's the Director of Programs and co-founder of the School Justice Project, a really awesome and much needed initiative and very pertinent to our topic of future of work, but I'm going to let her talk a little bit more about that in a second. She's an Aspen Fellow, focused her whole law school career on indigent representation and the protection of civil rights and human rights. She graduated from the American University Washington College of Law and lives in Washington, D.C. Also excited to have Gerry Gibbs. Gerry's the founding principal at Capital Impact Group. He was a presidential appointee in the Clinton administration. He served in the U.S. Department of Labor. He also has extensive political campaign experience, serving as a senior advisor to legislative and gubernatorial candidates, and was a political director in New Jersey for the presidential campaign of Al Gore. Please join me in welcoming Sarah Comeau and Gerry Gibbs on this session on policy.
So I'm excited for this next panel. Future of work, as we talked about, doesn't always include everybody. And this panel, we're going to explore the role that government, elected officials, policy play in the shaping of work. Basically the question is, how can government move future of work trends in a direction that's going to create opportunities for all workers? So I want to introduce, today we're joined by Gerry Gibbs. Gerry, in his role, is the founding principal at the Capital Impact Group, and also Sarah Comeau, who's the co-founder and director of programs at the School Justice Project. So with that, I'm going to kick it over to Gerry to introduce what he does at Capital Impact Group.
Thank you, Sam, for having me. Gerry Gibbs, I'm a principal at Capital Impact Group. We are a bipartisan public affairs and business development firm based in Trenton, New Jersey, our state capital. I've spent a good part of my career, all of it really, kind of in the political science and policy space. Kind of cut my teeth on Capitol Hill as a legislative policy aide. Worked in a presidential administration, and then came to New Jersey in the early 2000s to work in the treasurer's office here in the state of New Jersey, and started my firm in 2006. So, I'm at my core, kind of a policy wonk, geek, nerd, whatever you want to call it, but very excited to have this conversation, particularly in the COVID world that we live in. It has drastically changed the way that we do business at the firm, and it's drastically changed the behavior of legislators and policymakers, the governor, everyone, in ways that are unique, in ways that I think are going to be long lasting, which is very germane to this conversation.
Sure. I mean, I'm excited to hear your perspective, Gerry, especially given the COVID moment. Sarah Comeau, very excited that you were able to join us today, because I think what you do in your work is tremendous and is highly relevant for the topic of future work that doesn't always get included. So if you could, I'd love for you to share just some background on your work with the audience.
So I co-run a nonprofit in DC called the School Justice Project. We're a legal services organization, so we're a team of attorneys, and we use special education law and enforcement of special education law to disrupt mass incarceration and promote community-based alternatives to education. What we do is we represent young people between the ages of 17 and 22 that are court involved, that also have disabilities. If you are under age 22, and you have disabilities, you're entitled to education regardless of incarceration. So if you're in a prison, if you're in a jail, you're still entitled to education. But what we're seeing is that young people are not getting access to education. And when I say education, I'm also including workforce training, employability skills, vocational learning, and post-secondary, like preparing for post-secondary education. And I'm very excited to participate in this panel specifically today, because I think that the governments and policymakers have an obligation to include our court-involved young people in DC. These are 100% people of color, and they are excluded consistently time and again from the conversation about what workforce looks like. How can we ensure that policies to promote like equitable work opportunities include these young people? And it's broader than just policies, right? It's also a conversation about budget. How can we make sure that we have programming that is budgeted for, that reflects our values, that all young people can access equitable opportunities? So excited to be here. And to Gerry's comment about COVID, when we move forward and we are taking things digitally, we cannot forget the population of our communities and of our cities that cannot access technology to go digitally. So policies also have to reflect that technology divide.
But follow up to you, sir. When you talk about technology, I guess, what is your perspective on technology as it relates to your clients, on how accessible we make or lean into technology today?
It's great. I'll use COVID as an example. When schools shut down and kids went remote, for the young people that I represent that are in the community, they don't have computers at home. And it took about 2 months to negotiate with DC public schools to figure out how to get these kids access to computers. And some schools would say, oh, we already gave a computer to one of your younger peers, so we're not going to also give a computer to you. So access to even like a simple thing like a computer so you could get online to go to school. I had clients using their phone to try to figure out how to use Google Docs to participate in their online classrooms. For the young people that are locked up in the jail and in prisons, it becomes even more of a struggle and even more of an issue because these institutions and these structures, first of all, they're not wired for Wi-Fi and internet. And secondly, how are you going to give everyone computers? So we're currently in a battle to give all of our clients that are locked down access to computers and to technology.
You know, if I could jump in on this, Sarah's just touched on something that I saw in pretty stark terms: the digital divide, if you would. And I know that's an older phrase that's been thrown about, particularly back in previous administrations, but it really laid out stark the difference between folks that had access to technology, access to internet, the ability to participate fully remotely, and those that did not. And I happen to represent a couple clients that had the ability to provide free laptops, iPads, and other IT equipment for kids just so they could participate in school. And, you know, I think, you know, this past 3 months or so of remote learning really kind of laid bare how something is not having proper access to technology can really set you back. So that it's something going forward, I think, from a policy perspective, legislators, particularly ones that are focused on education policy, have been really focused on. The Commissioner of Education gave a briefing in front of the Education Committee here in the Senate. And the chairwoman, Teresa Ruiz, who's a senator out of the city of Newark, she grilled him. I mean, just absolutely lambasted him about what was the department doing to create opportunities for students across the board to participate fully in this remote learning environment that we were in, and quite frankly, could be in the fall.
I'm interested, Gerry, your perspective, given especially your background. What do you think the role is of government? And this might seem, you know, like I'm trying to take it higher level, but especially we've got a lot of C-level leaders, HR managers, employees who are, you know, in the audience for this event. What do you think the responsibility or the role of government is when we talk about things like labor and future of work?
You know, that's a great question. I think it's creating an atmosphere or creating a scenario where you provide access for the kids provide access to the tools of learning, right? So if we go back to school in the fall, we have to ensure that these schools are safe. Parents need to feel that they're sending their kids to an environment that's been sanitized, that is adhering to social distancing protocols, that's really allowing movement of young kids in a manner that keeps them safe and healthy. I think that's on every parent's mind first and foremost. And if there's any doubt that doesn't exist, I think a lot of parents would rather not have their kids come to school. At least I feel that way. The other part that I think government can play a role in is it's funding. It's funding for not just schools, but also programs that touch our social safety net. Sarah touched on the programming for young people that are involved in the correctional system. Being able to make sure that that funding is increased or reprioritized. We know that states are entering a very, very tough budget climate because of the effects of this stay-at-home and shelter-in-place that we've gone through. But I think that it's going to take legislators to really rethink funding priorities. There's not going to be enough money to go around to fully fund everything that we would think is important for the state. So it really is going to be a reflection of the administration and then the legislative leadership, what their priorities are, and make sure that those priorities are funded at a level that work and make sense.
Same question to you, Sarah. And I'm always I always shake my head when we have a lot of conversations about the work you do. About it's super sad in certain scenarios. If initially my reaction is always it's silly that we don't take certain efforts for education seriously. But I guess what has been your perspective as it's evolved over the time of your work on government's impact and responsibility?
So I am a very proud Washingtonian. A little plug for Make Us Number 51. Everyone support it. Our government, it's unique in DC because we're not a state. We have a council, which is akin to a state legislature, but Congress has to approve all of our laws once they're proposed to Congress. So our legislature writes the laws, the executive branch says, okay, I'm good with this, and then we send it up to Congress. So I am very proud of what my government has done in ensuring and working towards a more equitable city. We have passed a number of legislation recently that is reflective of what I believe are Washingtonian values, right? Equity, an anti-racist framework, ensuring that all people, regardless of court involvement, justice system involvement, can have opportunities. And with legislation, so we've passed some good laws recently, but with that, you need to put dollars behind it. So one thing we're doing in the city right now, as an example, it's not necessarily education related, but is we are trying to push for a trauma-based response to violence. And so we're having a lot of laws and a lot of things look at how we can integrate that and how we can change and remove old laws to focus on interrupting violence. But it doesn't really matter if you have a law in the books without the resources and the budget to back it up. So our justice system, our juvenile justice agency, has done a really good job in the past 5 years of giving kids not just, a internship opportunity, but providing them with an internship opportunity that also pays. All my clients are low income and they don't have the privilege to take internships at, where places that don't pay. They just can't do that. And a lot of people cannot. So that's just one example of things that government agencies can do for the young people that they are responsible for, is that they can create programming that is tailored to remove the systemic barriers that these young people face to workforce development, to employment opportunities, to education. And get creative, use your imagination. COVID is going to be hard and all of our state budgets are suffering because of the reaction to COVID. But, you know, we can piggyback on defund the police. Let's take away some money there and let's put it into employment. Let's put it back into the community where it belongs. So I think the role of government is to do that. And it's a little bit of a controversial role. I understand that, but that's what I believe it should do.
Well, Sarah, why do we make it so hard to access education? It doesn't make sense. You know, someone you use the again, if somebody is court involved, and it only makes sense that when somebody re-enters, we want them to be ready to hit the ground running. Why do we make that so difficult?
Well, my answer is structural racism. But if we step back from that, I think a lot of agencies, it's really difficult to the answer I get a lot when I'm like, why isn't my client enrolled in school? Why wasn't my client provided this? Why aren't you doing this? Why isn't there a reentry plan when he's getting discharged from the jail? Why are we doing all these things? The answer is, oh, it's really too hard to do it. DC is in a unique position. We don't have a prison. Our prison system is actually, we contract with the Federal Bureau of Prisons to run our prison. Again, another reason to everyone support us being number 51. So anyone that's serving a sentence for a term of incarceration in DC is in a Federal Bureau of Prisons facility across the country. And when I ask our school district to ensure that they have access to education, the response is, it's too hard. How am I going to do that? We need to get creative, and we need to actually show that people have value and that we are striving toward an equitable city.
Gerry, when you think about policy and you work with a lot of corporate clients, what should the average or the typical C-level executive know today, or be more involved in and pay more attention to, from your perspective, kind of being having a front row seat for the way things work in labor and policy at the state or federal level? What should we be caring about more if the focus of a business is to try to create a model that is profitable and successful?
Well, I think it's a couple things. I think one, I think COVID has kind of forced all of us into a whole different mode of consciousness as it relates to of work. on this Zoom, Sam, and Sarah. It was a pleasure to meet you virtually. I also think that people are having a lot more honest conversations these days, and that's refreshing. As somebody who's been in lobbying for a long time and talking to folks who, I never felt were truly transparent in our interaction or always had, a different motive. I just find that there's just a lot more open, honest conversation these days, which I appreciate. I want to know where you're coming from, whether I agree with you or not. I just think it bodes for a better interaction and a better relationship and outcome. A little long-winded, but that was a great question.
Great. No, thank you. That was great. Sarah, what's your hope?
That everyone can have an opportunity to work and to, what Gerry said he wants for his kids. Everyone should have an opportunity to work. Great. So that's the session. I want to thank everybody on our panel today for sharing. I had some powerful takeaways I was writing down during the session, and I'm sure everybody else was as well. And thank you both. Thanks, Sam.
Okay.
Cool. Great to meet you, Gerry.
Great to meet you, Sarah.
One Huddle team, thank you so much for extending me the invite to your live event on the future of work. My name is Daniel Steinberg, and I manage app and channel partnerships at Clio, which is a cloud-based legal management software. Today, I'm actually going to run you through a short clip on what I personally think needs to change in order to better prepare the next generation of workers. For me, today's theme is all about learning and development. And I think the overarching message on what ultimately needs to shift in the way that we prepare our future workforce. For me, there's really 3 core milestones where I think that change management needs to be adjusted in order to better prepare the younger generation and future workforce. For me, it begins in college and university. I think adapting students to real world experiences and shifting away from the classic textbook experience is really going to enhance the way that they operate as a future worker in the professional world. I think it follows up and progresses early on in their professional careers. I think that firms in general need to create enhanced culture experiences and development teams in order to help these new members experience and adapt to both a remotely working world and in-office experience. I think having the opportunity to juggle and enhance those experiences is going to be extremely important from a corporate level. Lastly, I think it continues on into the lives of their working day-to-day management. I think that it's really integral to instill being an owner of your own work into these young professionals, because they're not going to have day-to-day managers looking over their back or understanding what work and what expectations and deadlines are needed to be completed with the new shift in working world. And I think that the overarching learning and development teams are going to need to focus in on that core piece of ownership moving forward.
In response to the question, what has to happen to better prepare the next generation of workers? I think one huge thing is really an attitude adjustment, a change in mindset. I think a lot of kids, in my generation, really think, their job is going to be given to them. A lot of things in their life have been given to them. I mean, I've had plenty given to me, but the way that I've been taught by my parents, peers, teachers is that nothing really in life is free. Nothing's given to you. And I really think it starts with excelling in school, trying in school, giving your best effort. Because I think with that comes junior year, senior year, you land a great internship, you get that great experience, and after that, after all that hard work, I think comes the job you've been looking for. After this, once you get that job, I think something that's really going to be different from past experiences with our parents and their jobs is coming out of this COVID thing. I think a lot of things are going to change. I think there's we got to learn how to excel and be efficient through Zoom, through phone calls instead of being in person, hand-on-hand work. I think this is going to be something, a big change for a lot of people. I know a lot of people have had definitely developed and worked through these hard times. But I think this is something that's going to be prolonged, and it's something that we're going to have to become great in doing. And really, I think this is going to be how the business world and even the world in general is going to be for a while.
I'm going to hand this next session over to our manager of branded media, Jaime Lara. He's going to be spending time with a champion in the state of New Jersey and across the Northeast. Craig Schlosser is the VP of Middlesex County's Regional Chamber of Commerce. He's the vice chair, advisory board member on New Jersey Small Business Development Center, has a front row seat for what's happening at the small business side as it relates to future of work. He was a former account manager and worked on the service side with Coca-Cola. I'm very excited to have Craig Schlosser here today with Jaime Lara.
So welcome everybody to our next one-on-one interview. I'm here joined with Craig Schlosser. Craig, great to have you here, man.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, sure. So, I feel like you're the best person to introduce yourself to our guests. So take it away, man.
My name is Craig Schlosser. I'm the vice president with the Middlesex County Regional Chamber of Commerce. We're located right here in New Brunswick, New Jersey, right by Rutgers University and the corporate headquarters of Johnson & Johnson.
Oh, nice. I know exactly where that is then.
And that's, between J&J and Rutgers, most people are like, oh yeah, I know exactly where you are.
That exact.
Landmarks do so much. It's great, except when you're driving and you don't know the street names.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because that kind of brought me to what was top of mind when, I saw your background. We've been talking to a lot of people from in like a national scape and almost with a global viewpoint. But, a lot of people, I feel like, sort of more localized regional aspects, discussions of what the workforce needs in those regions is sort of getting overlooked because we're having all these really grand conversations about, a changing workforce. But I feel like you're at a very particular spot where you're sort of seeing local mom and pop shops, but then, being with Johnson & Johnson as well, big corporations also deciding to plant a flag and make a town their home. I guess, in general, what are your hopes for that kind of balance? How do you think that these two very different spectrums of working are going to change in the future? And what does that mean for, Middlesex County from your perspective?
First and foremost, I really appreciate you bringing up the question. I think it's absolutely excellent. There's two things you can see with it. J&J, having them across the street, they're just from a cultural perspective, working with them, especially with what we do with our Human Resources Summit that's SHRM accredited. And those of you that aren't familiar with SHRM, that's Society for Human Resources Management Professionals. And then there's also HRCI, which are the two main accrediting organizations when it comes to HR professionals. We run an accredited summit every year with Central New Jersey SHRM, and we've been very fortunate to have Johnson & Johnson support as either a keynote or a primary panelist with that. And I cannot tell you the great job that they do as an organization, engaging their employees, living their credo, and doing so many wonderful things. On the other side of the coin, I'm the vice chair for the Small Business Development Center at Rutgers. And what Elaine McLean does there is the regional director, and working with those small businesses to really help them be successful is just as important there as it is for Johnson & Johnson. Because if you don't have engaged employees, you don't empower them, you don't energize them. Prior to the chamber, I was with Coca-Cola. And you look at a company with another great culture there. But those three things, the empowerment, the energizing, the engagement, are things that we talked about at Coca-Cola, which I've seen every successful company be able to go ahead and deploy. So regardless of size, there's guiding principles, just like with a successful business and how you operate, that need to be utilized regardless of size, industry, or whatever it might be. So I think getting those principles executed properly and making it a real clear empowerment objective for the leadership of those organizations is essential to any company's success.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And then how do you feel that, what do you feel like your role is in delivering those principles and creating those principles?
Well, I think as a chamber, it's important to recognize what you can and cannot do. You cannot be everything to everybody. The chamber has two main areas that we operate in, and that's connections and resources. Resources are anything that helps your business. That's like saying there's a wall behind me. It's very vague. Connections is really understanding that business and getting them to the right resources at the right time. Now, that is a lot harder than it sounds. When we do that, you get three things that happen. Businesses stay here, businesses grow here, and new businesses come. And that's economic development. And when you look at your membership, chambers are mainly self-funded 501c6s. We're a non-lobbying 501c6. So really a lot of our focus is on that resource component and connection. So to us, it's about that engagement and understanding of the members, and then finding that supportive ecosystem that exists here for us to go ahead and leverage. Now, we can only utilize whatever resources are available in our ecosystem. So we're only as good as the resources around us. We're very fortunate here in central New Jersey to have such a strong supportive environment, especially in the workforce arena. We do very, very well with that. And a lot of credit to our workforce board that Kevin Kurtzell runs as the CEO, and just does a great job there. And also to Rutgers, the county, Middlesex County College. There's a lot of key educational partners here that make a difference every day.
Gotcha. That's amazing to hear. And so, looking forward then, I guess, at future of work trends, I mean, what do you feel like is missing right now in the conversation when we're discussing these future problems? And sort of what do you think needs to, I guess, preemptively change to address those issues?
So I think that's a really excellent question as we look at the future of work. And one thing comes down is the concept of credentialing. And what credentials are associated with is industry recognized certifications associated with a career path. Now, the idea of stackable credentials is really important. And that's something that we've done a pretty good job here in New Jersey and the region throughout, is understanding that you start somewhere, get a certification, and be able to build towards a greater educational objective to create a skilled workforce. What's also good about that is it creates that career path. And that gets that hybrid of what you've seen in terms of the new apprenticeship model, which is out there, which is so very important. I think, really working with the U.S. Department of Labor on apprenticeship programs, they're very adaptable to creating new apprenticeship pathways or modifying existing ones to work with you. And that's something I've been really impressed with, by the flexibility to do those things to help people be able to move forward in their career path. Because what we're seeing is, especially for smaller employers, you're getting individuals that are coming in, they're getting developed, and then they're moving on to something a little bit bigger. The credentials are important because it says that that person has a basic competency in those areas and that their skill set is defined enough, along with the made, saved, and achieved accomplishments that are on someone's resume.
Got it.
So from a chamber perspective, one area that we've really been able to do it, and credit to your CEO, Sam, for this, is Sam was fantastic in working with us in an innovative program where we have the One Huddle application that we're able to work with our members, get that out to them, allow them to get in the concept of gamification, start to build their capabilities and their skills, tied in with our virtual programs that we do for our Open for Business Growth and Development series that are focused on what we would call, when I was at Coca-Cola, or as many HR folks will call it, capability building.
So really just looking outside of what's on this certificate from some Ivy League school, God forbid, or some other program, really just expanding what is accepted, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, and I think being able to expand upon that and make the position, company-specific training is important as much as industry-specific training is important. That's where you see the two different components of it. What's good about the application is you can use it for company-specific. Their credentials are industry-specific. That allows you, for some positions, need a college education, some do not, some need a combination. But one thing that I think we all have learned to embrace and adapt here is that lifelong learning concept. That's no longer just a philosophical conversation. That is now the norm. I mean, if you and I talked about the amount of things that we learned over the past 90 days in terms of technology, it is absolutely absurd. But it's the ability for individuals to continually adapt and learn. But from a company perspective, what we need to do is create those applications and that learning for individuals so they don't have to go hunt that on their own. People want to get better, but a company can create the structure and direct their individuals in the right area for their company.
Absolutely. And that actually flows perfectly into my next question, which is sort of what skills do you think either that people are pursuing to learn on their own or that companies are telling their employees to look more into or to upskill themselves at? What skills do you think are being overvalued or which other skills are ignored? And just in general, how does that change the nature of work, the nature of jobs from your perspective?
So I was reading an article the other day, and I think this is a really good question, is so often in today's society, we look at how many tasks did you accomplish today? You did 100 tasks, good job. But did those tasks really help you move forward towards your strategic business objective? And if the answer is no, then you're not really able to move forward the way you need to. And I think one thing that's often forgotten about is the concept of deep thought. And if you're not able to go ahead and really have someone that can look at a strategic problem, understand it, and then come up with an innovative solution that's really the differentiation that I think too often is missed, and that's a soft skill. So as I look at things with it, technical hard skills can be taught, but the right mindset and the right approach, that's something that's an intangible asset that can be developed and grown. But I think it's one thing that we really have to look at from a cultural perspective within a company to nurture, and also from an educational system, encourage that type of thought process development and confidence in individuals that they know how to communicate that effectively to their senior leaders when they first enter the workforce.
Mm-hmm. Do you see that kind of conflict, I guess, between an intangible soft skill versus like raw data? I mean, that's been a conflict that's been around in the workplace since industrialization. How do you think technology, automation, robots, do you think that makes that process more complicated, easier?
I think it's how you approach it. And I think it's the mindset that matters. And regardless of what those challenges or opportunities might be, it's how you approach that specific scenario is what matters. How you communicate and collaborate with your team is what matters. And that's where the culture of your organization is so essential. I was reading a great article the other day that came off of Angel List. It was off of their select reading. And those of you that get the newsletter will probably have seen it about 2 weeks ago, where it talks about your company's culture is your competitive advantage. So in this scenario, when a question like that comes up, I think your company's culture will really allow you to answer that question effectively. I know from the members I work with and what we have here at the chamber, we look at it as, okay, let's come up with an innovative solution that's going to help us meet the market need, that's going to help us service our community and our members and provide value to drive us forward. That's where we're going to start. We're not going to look at what tool or where the data is on that. We see an opportunity. We understand there's a challenge out there that we can turn into an opportunity. Now let's go build our case to make sure we do that. Instead of looking data first, I think it's looking at the bigger picture first is the way that we would approach it.
Gotcha. And that's sort of regardless of technological advancements, automation, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, there's a great article that came out about how, business owners see opportunity and they're positive, even with everything that's going on with the world right now, in the next 6 to 12 months based on what they're seeing. Now, that's great. And that's data that proves it. But could I also tell you from conversations I'm having that, yes. So from a chamber perspective to this conversation on the future of work, what can we do to position companies that have the right people in the right positions with the right resources to take advantages of those opportunities and accelerate their growth? That's how we would look at that data. Got
it. That's excellent to hear. And moving on to my next question then, again, going back to, you being in the Chamber of Commerce for a county, again, a very specific position. One foot is almost like in the trenches, with business owners. The other is sort of like a, eye in the sky kind of macro perspective. And especially your work with Rutgers, the relationship between how both federal and state policy affects your work sphere, and then how education from a K through 12 to a collegiate standpoint like Rutgers, how all of that intersects and affects just labor, just work, just jobs at the end of the day. I mean, what do you see from both of those ends really changing over the next 10, 15 years or so? And how is that going to impact the work you're doing and the people you're advocating for, you think?
Well, I think there's a lot of ways to look at it. I think it's an excellent question because there's a couple things. First and foremost, we operate within the ecosystem we're given. So whatever that we have to work with, we're going to work with, and we're happy to have it. So the workforce board that I mentioned earlier does a great job with Kevin Kerslow's team. And I worked with them for years, the one-stop operator. Now I'm a board member for the Workforce Development Board here in Middlesex. And from a federal component, there's what's called WIO, which is the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. That really drives your workforce board, and that's your federal component of it. It's got some really good components to it. One thing is there's a youth program component where interns are able to come in and work at different companies and gain different skills. We have one here at the chamber. Young man's fantastic. Chris does a great job for us. We're teaching him Salesforce. If you go online and look at Salesforce right now, I learned it 10, 12 years ago. It's a fantastic application, but it is a lot to learn. Well, there's a great program in there called Skill Up that the county has where you can take free industry recognized credential courses and then get your Salesforce certification. On top of that, what I look at, then we take a platform like we have with One Huddle, we can teach him company specific training or help develop certain soft skills that we couldn't do there. So again, we're looking at industry, We're looking at a workforce program that's bringing us a talented individual, and we're helping them develop his soft skills here within the chamber. That's a holistic workforce development program. And I think the more we can get towards those holistic programs that are taking educational institutions, partnering them up with community organizations to help people move forward, the more successful we can be. So I think an understanding of the classroom is very important in creating the hard skills. The thought process associated with that learn during those skills to allow for lifelong learning and evolution, continually allowing those that want to move forward and enhance their skills, we need to continue to find a way to do that. And that's what certifications are important, because even if you have your bachelor's, your master's, or your PhD, we have two entirely different worlds here in Middlesex. We have a large amount of healthcare positions, and then we have a lot of manufacturing and logistics jobs, the most in the entire state per county in manufacturing, which are two entirely separate endeavors.
Yeah.
So when you look at it, you have both sides, and then we have education with Rutgers.
So since you brought up again the sort of the two fronts you're working with, very stark differences, I guess, like, what are the challenges you think you face, or you feel you face, in trying to deal with those two separate worlds? And I guess then, since they are different spheres, you know, what are the challenges you feel these institutions are facing from government, from education, from, you know, the impending changing nature of work?
Well, I think a lot of times when you look at it from your government partners, it's an understanding of what they can and can't do. And from your private sector partners, it's understanding what they can and can't do. Taking a look at those and then really trying to put them together in the optimal situation to get the best possible outcome for what you feel is the workforce needs and what companies needs. The most important part of any company is their people, which is one area why we put such a focus here at the Chamber. We have an Emerging Leaders Summit. We have a Women's Leadership Summit. We have an HR Summit. We go really in depth into developing people on a capability level within the mentorship that we offer. And one reason why we ever open for business growth and development programs, because it's about people. If we develop people, they can be successful. So if we leverage all of those different components that we have and allowed for us to be that connector to get that aha moment, that's what we can do. We're not going to come and put together a groundbreaking component or program on something. That's a limitation of being a self-funded 501c6. That's not our purpose. We're connected and we work with resources. That goes back to my conversation earlier. We are only as good as the ecosystem we support. We can drive engagement, we can get people involved, we can bring them to the table, but ultimately those change agents have to decide to drive it forward on themselves.
I see,
and I'm seeing a lot of that stuff starting to come. It's also a realization that government and private sector move at two different speeds. So as we continue to move forward with that, those building that understanding, building those coalitions, I think is essential to success.
Yeah, and that's sort of regardless of whether it's a big corporate enterprise or the small mom and pop shop, right? Just those basic principles.
Yeah, because if we find principles, I always look at it this way: if we have philosophical alignment, we have common ground. Think about any partnership. You want to have a mutually beneficial opportunity. By creating a baseline and an understanding of what it is, why it's important, and what you're working together towards, and how each one of you have a positive stake in this and your role in it, you can be successful. That's really what our job is with that, is in helping bring that together and be that consensus builder.
Yeah. And do you see that focus ever changing at any point, as long as work is going to be a thing?
I've been working with chambers of commerce doing workforce development since 2016. So I've been in it 14 years. And I've also, as I mentioned before, I've been in as a volunteer. I've also been involved as a full-time, professional nonprofit executive. To me, I don't see that changing, because chambers have always been a conduit of connections. But recognition that we can only work within the ecosystem we have, and we need to continue to find new partners. A lot of my role is, hey, there's an opportunity. Let's find a partner that can help make this happen. How can we be innovative? How can we use technology to break down boundaries, but also make things more personable? And it's an understanding that the tool isn't the solution. The strategy is what's going to allow us to be successful. And as long as we're looking at it from a strategic, not a tactical perspective, and a holistic endeavor, I think we can be very successful. It's when you get so into the weeds on something, I think that's when we lose our effectiveness, because we lose our ability to be that bigger picture strategic connector that provides value.
Yeah. Again, as you said, like, that's kind of them as a change driver is on whatever business, whatever company is to do that.
Exactly.
Looking back at the sort of ecosystem you work with, what do you feel like is the biggest factor in volatility or changing that ecosystem? Is it technology? Because at least that's where my mind jumps to first.
I think with the ecosystem, I think it's, as we look at it, it's what companies feel that they need, and it's what job seekers feel that they need. And then deciding what mechanisms can be used to help bridge that gap. So if you look at a lot of the components right now in regards to the value of a college education versus not the value of the college education, the certifications versus any other component, you look at it from a non-industry recognized credential, there's back and forth regardless of which side you're on. And I think one of the most important things to me within that is always finding a way to bridge those two gaps together to allow them to be successful. And if we can find a way to do that through technology, that's great. If it's through programs, awesome. Those are things that really are so important for us to bridge. So two things that I always look at is, okay, we need to have an idea of the open jobs, what industries they're in, where they're located, and then we need to give people tools to get better. So if they want to get education counseling to help them get a college degree, let's go for it. The number one number that always probably stuck out in my head in the latest State Employment and Training Commission report for the state of New Jersey is 21% of the workforce has some college education but no degree. Only 7% of the workforce has an associate's degree. So there's obviously a big disconnect there from getting college to that completion there. So that's where I think when you look at STEP credentials, that's important, because if you're getting people credentials while they're on their way to their college degree or getting them a certification, you're creating some type of educational distinction for them to have a higher earning or some type of career path. The worst part is, hey, I have 45 credits, or I have 115 credits, but I have no degree. Well, you're still close, but you don't have it. But if you were advised early on to get a credential that allows you to stack with that, going from a certification to an associate's degree to a bachelor's degree, no matter what happens when life happens, you have a chance to be more successful. And I think that's where education can be helpful. That's where organizations like the Chamber can be helpful in creating education here. And that's where companies can be helpful in developing people for a career path, regardless of their size.
Awesome. Excellent. Well, we're at about 4:30 perfectly. So thanks again so much, Craig. It was really fascinating to hear, your thoughts on this perspective. And again, I truly think that this is a very unique position amongst a lot of speakers we've had that you're in. And I think it's really amazing what you guys are doing.
My pleasure.
Okay, I'm very excited about this next session. We're going to be joined by Senator Bob Kerrey. He was the former senator from the great state of Nebraska. He's also the 35th governor of Nebraska. Before he entered politics, Senator Kerrey served in the Vietnam War as a U.S. Navy SEAL. He was awarded the Medal of Honor for heroism in combat. He was a candidate for the Democratic presidential nomination in 1992, and from 2001 to 2010, Senator Kerrey served as president of the New School, which is a university in New York City. He's currently a co-chair and on the advisory board of Issue One, which is an organization that's mission is to fight for real solutions to the problem of money in politics, and has a tremendous amount to share today on future of work from the impact on government. Please welcome Senator Bob Kerrey.
From your seat, with your tremendous experience as a governor and a senator, the president of the New School, like what do you think of when you hear future of work?
Well, first of all, the 15,000 year history of human beings, and includes moments when we discover something that makes it easier for us to do our work. The wheel is a great example. It makes it easier to move objects, makes it easier to move ourselves. The domestication of animals. We domesticated horses and cows, and it makes it easier to transport ourselves and to do our work. It's not just that we want to have animals around the house that'll go get the newspaper. It's about making work easier or more productive and more efficient. So this is the 15,000 year history of human beings. Now, it's almost always the case that there's going to be both positive and negative consequences for the innovation. Take the movable type as an example. There were negative consequences to giving people the opportunity to be able to read for themselves and decide for themselves what they thought the book itself said. So it's not the civilizations that the nation states that struggle, the communities that you can take it all the way down to a community. The struggle to survive are those who simply say in the beginning, we only see the negative side of technological advances, and therefore we're not going to adapt it. So all AI is well-trained algorithms, and all a robot is a machine that'll do things the same over and over and over, making our work easier because it doesn't make any mistakes. So it's I do think that the larger question is not so much the future of work, but how do we adjust our laws and our trade policies to make certain that if somebody's actually willing to go to work and they find themselves without a job, that there are public adjustments that make that transition easier. Because I think there's going to be more of that. I mean, it's not possible for it not to be the case. And what we've designed is a safety net, the most important part of which is Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid, that was designed in the 1960s. Social Security wasn't designed in the 1960s, but it really became a substantial part of our safety net program following the Second World War. Its original design was $1,000. You could get it if you quit working. The whole idea was to get older people out of the workforce so younger people could come in. So we have a safety net that's been built for an old manufacturing era. And I think we need something different because otherwise you're simply going to find yourself in a situation where you say, I've got to wait till I'm 62, 63, 64, 65 before the safety net kicks in, or I can quit work and go on Medicaid, and basically prove that I'm poor and promise to stay poor in order to get the benefit of the program, which is hardly, it seems to me, a correct way of doing things. So I think it's as important to think about what kind of safety net programs, and it's a terrible word in some ways, but that's the common way of describing it. Are we going to have? Should it be guaranteed minimum income? Should be there a non-means tested transfer program that basically says you're in the workforce and we're going to provide this amount of income for you because it may be the job goes away, and if it goes away, we want to make certain that you don't find yourself basically in terrible economic straits. So I mean, I'm citing one example, but there's other examples like that where, in addition to talking about the future work, we have to talk about what kind of laws do we want as we do what we've been doing for 230 or 40 years, which is try to make the union more perfect. In this case, I think the future work is in many ways going to be dependent on the kind of safety that we create. And the problem is, the people that are writing laws don't understand the business typically, and the people that are in business don't understand the importance of the laws. And so we have a bit of a disconnect going on, to put it mildly.
Right. I was going to ask you, I'm glad you brought up the last point, because one of the questions I always have is what is the responsibility that government has to ensure that its citizens have access to the right jobs and the right skills for those jobs? I guess, where is that? What is in your opinion, is the expectation of government's responsibility on that front?
Well, first of all, government can do no more or less than what the people themselves want to do. So it's up to people to decide what kind of basically foundational program do you want to have in place. And just again, back on Medicare and Medicaid, which were enacted in 1965. And in 1965, Sam, you could, with a high school degree, you could go out and you could be practically illiterate and get a manufacturing job that paid you enough to support your entire family, that provided health care, post-employment health care, and a pension, a defined contribution, a defined benefit pension in 1965. We had the draft going on as well, so you did a couple years in the service, but your job was there when you came back. That was what was going on in 1965. So Obviously, those days are gone. So now, I would just keep coming back to it. You look at Medicaid, just take Medicaid as one example. Medicaid was not initially, still is. The law is a federal state program. So the states opt in, all 50 states have opted in, but all 50 states are different. So if you lose your job in New York and you see a job opportunity in Texas and you're on Medicaid, that's a disincentive to move, because the healthcare benefits in Texas are substantially lower than the healthcare benefits in New York. So you have this impediment to mobility, and mobility is hard under any circumstances. It's difficult to pick up your family and move. But if you've got a law that provides a disincentive to move, it makes it even more difficult. So, I think it's a given that you're going to find yourself in a situation where there's a job opportunity for you and it's not in your hometown any longer. And the question is, is there incentive for you to take that job opportunity and move? It's easy for me to say it, but right now the federal programs are written that it's a disincentive, except once you get on Medicare. The joy of Medicare, and the reason that lots of people argue Medicare for all, is in part because it's 100% mobile. We have Medicare beneficiaries living in Mexico. You can live anywhere in the United States. The Medicare benefit in Texas is the same as the Medicare benefit in New York or Omaha or Albuquerque. It doesn't matter where you are. It's the same Medicare benefit. That, you can say the quality of healthcare might be different in your location. If you move to a mountaintop where there aren't any doctors, don't be surprised if you're going to have trouble getting access to healthcare. But for the most part, the benefit package is the same, and that it's not surprising, therefore, that you see people moving around a lot once they become eligible for Medicare.
Sure. It's what is your? I'd be interested to hear. Specifically as an example, I mentioned to you, I have a technology company, and one of the things that happened during COVID was so many companies realized immediately, we need to be ready for remote work. And, I don't know if it was so much as companies weren't aware that that was a trend that was coming anyway, but there was definitely a major shift where companies had to figure out how do they rethink the technology they use and how they operate. One of the things that has always bothered me over the years is when we work with a company, they generally give job training and access to education within a workforce. There's a lot of inequalities there of who gets it and who gets access to it. And one of the things that's always bothered me is the way that when you look at a frontline worker who in many ways can grow within an organization and someday be in management or be a long-term contributor, some companies look at the risk of investing in a frontline worker being too much. Do you think that COVID has changed or accelerated certain things that we need to be aware of right now when we think about making sure that all workers at all corners of the workforce, like if they're willing to wake up and work hard, they have access to the tools to do that? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's a really good question. I mean, I think you've got to have, first of all, you again, it's back to the rules and regulations. The regulations and rules have to be sufficiently flexible to accommodate the change, because oftentimes, particularly at the federal level, but even at the state level, the rules and regs get written for incumbent companies, and to protect that incumbent company, make it easier because they're going to have more money to hire the people necessary to get the rules written in their favor. So if you've got maybe the best example is higher education. Higher education it's a protected industry. If you want to open a college or university that grants regional accreditation, and that's where the value is, because if you run a university and I run a university and one of your students transfers to my university, I get to decide whether or not to accept those credits. And the average cost per credit hour in America for a fully accredited liberal arts college is $400 or $500 a credit. So it's real money. I get income, especially in an environment where we have a student loan program where I don't, as a university or a college, I have no liability if there's a default. It's no skin off my nose if the student graduates and doesn't get a job. I can lament it, but there's no financial cost to me, and there should be. I should bear at least half of the responsibility for that debt if it gets defaulted. And so there's a regulatory structure that you constantly have to look at, because oftentimes it doesn't favor a new entrant. Because if you know this from your business, you start a new business, your cost of regulation as a fraction of your business is much greater than an incumbent who, you get too good at it and Facebook will buy you and put you out of business. So I think you constantly have to look at those rules and regulations, especially in the education environment, and particularly in higher education. The last thing I'd say on that is that it's just, we have got to recognize that the upward mobility that existed when I graduated from college in 1965 hasn't disappeared, but it is nowhere near like it was before. When I was running the new school, I could basically tell you what your SAT scores are going to be based upon your household income. And the SAT and the ACT scores determine whether or not you get in the best of the colleges. And so you have this kind of vicious cycle of people who are doing well tend to do well when it comes to applying and going to the best colleges, which is not good for the country. Because it's both from the standpoint of governing the country and from the standpoint of broad-based economic development, you have to have wide distribution, and we don't have that today. The college debt that is a problem for a college graduate today is college debt where the student didn't complete the work. So if you graduate from college and you've got debt, the likelihood is you're going to be able to pay it off. If you don't graduate, the likelihood is you won't. We have 200,000 Social Security beneficiaries that are having their monthly checks reduced to pay off their student debt. So, so I think you have to look at that regulatory structure, but I also think you have to ask our universities and colleges to bear more responsibility for that debt. And I think you've got to make it easier for non-incumbents to enter that space and get to a point where they can offer regionally accredited content as well, so that you've got competitive alternatives that are lower cost than what we currently have. I mean, you know this. If I said to you, or we agree that you and I are both going to learn, we want to learn German. We want to learn how to read, write, and speak German. It is unlikely that what we're going to do is choose to sign up for a program where we got to sit in a classroom and wait for a teacher to come and teach us. We just aren't going to do it. We don't have to, because there's plenty of offerings on the internet that are much, much lower cost, much more convenient, and much more effective. So, and what I'm saying is the current incumbent in the higher education market has a massive investment in capital that's being directed to build classrooms, which is not how students learn. And my guess is you walk into most universities and say, gee, I've got this great program. We're using games to teach. And it'll freak them out. They say, well, that can't possibly work, even though the evidence probably shows that it does. So I think there's a lot of things tucked into the answer, some of which I've provided, and most of which I don't know. I mean, it's a very big question, and I think it's something we have to constantly wrestle with.
What do you say to the? This is always say this is my favorite time of year because of college. Whether it's high school or college students that take on a summer internship. Because what do you say to the young person that maybe just graduated from college, or the one who's considering what they do going into the fall semester or not, when it comes to preparing for whatever the future of work might look like? What would you say to them?
Well, I think what would I say? I would say there's a couple of things that are really important to you. Let's presume that you're just turned 18 or leaving your parents and going off into and being on your own. The first and most important one is this is the first time in your life you've been free. And you get to decide what time you get up in the morning. You get to decide what you do. You get to use my biggest bluff. You get to decide how you're going to play the hand. And you don't always draw your cards and say, gee, I got a straight flush. You don't get a straight flush every time. Sometimes you get lousy cards, and you got to play the cards. But you have freedom, and you get to decide. And very much connected to that, understand that you've got another 6 or 7 years before your prefrontal cortex is fully developed. And you're going to be making a lot of your decisions from the base of your brain, which is called the amygdala. And it's unreliable. It may have enabled us to survive as a species, but it's an unreliable, I think, source of decision making, except in those dramatic situations where your life is at risk, which isn't going to happen. Again, referencing this book, in poker they call it tilt. When you become so emotional, you make a stupid decision, and oftentimes your opponent wants you to tilt, trying to get you to tilt, to increase the chances you're going to do something dumb. So recognize that in our country, you are now free. You get to decide. You want to have a family? You want to join the military? We have laws, unfortunately, that say you can't drink or smoke, which is kind of stupid. But it is what it is. You don't, there's, and that part of your brain that you've been using an awful lot isn't terribly reliable. So be very careful. Again, referencing the book, this guy, Eric Seidel, who was her teacher, said the most important thing in poker, and it's also the most important thing in life, is 2 words of advice: pay attention. Just look around you, pay attention. Answer the question, where are you? What's going on? Don't become like a car in a car wash and get drugged along in the dump current, because you've got free agency, and it matters what you do. So, I think it's really important for an 18-year-old to assess their radically changed situation correctly. Otherwise, not only will they make mistakes, but they won't be able to comprehend that that's part of the deal. We get to make mistakes. I got a jack eye hand and you got a full house and I lose. I can't blame the cards. It's just, that's the way it happened. So time to play another hand.
Sure. It's I love the poker analogies.
Yeah. Well, Van Noyen loved poker because of the situation of imperfect knowledge. And I really love that idea because that is life. It just, you're sitting there saying, I'm relatively certain of this, but I'm never 100% certain. And part of what you're doing is you're making an educated guess.
Yeah, and I feel like even in the last 3 months, talking about the businesses that have been able to sustain and stay strong and through this time, you've been operating with a lot of imperfect knowledge. Down to every day was you weren't promised or you weren't sure what it was going to bring.
So once you've comprehended, I'm now treating you like an 18-year-old. Once you've comprehended the political reality of your life, which is you're free, you're on your own, and the physiological condition of your life, which is you got a ways to go before your prefrontal cortex is fully developed. Meaning, by the way, in addition to that, don't kid yourself. You start smoking a lot of pot, you're going to damage that prefrontal cortex, and you're never going to get it back. So in addition to that, I would tell a story. So when back in the 90s, when I was in the Senate, we used to do a conference every year on savings with young high school students. And the whole question was, can I become wealthy by saving a little bit over a long period of time? And our guest speaker every year was Warren Buffett, who's done a pretty good job of doing that. So the first question he got was from a young person, said, Mr. Buffett, we've been studying how to become wealthy all day long, but aren't most wealthy people jerks? And Warren said, no, that's not my experience. He said, my experience is that wealth just allows you to be a little more of what you already were. So if you start off a jerk and become wealthy, you become a really big jerk. And then he gave them really good advice. He said, 3 most important things: you got intelligence, you got energy, and you got character. You've got all the intelligence and energy you need. And character That's completely under your control. And it's the only thing that will determine whether or not somebody wants to be your friend or your husband or your wife. It's the most valuable thing you've got, and you build it every single day. If you can get to a point where your character is such that people say, I trust you, I like you, I feel comfortable around you, you've got that kind of character, you're going to do all right in life. You can survive an awful lot of terrible situations, he said, if you've done the work of building your own character.
That's great, Senator. I appreciate it. I got one last question. I know you got to run.
Yes.
I'm asking everybody this last question. What is your hope for the future of work? I think it's super important given the campaign year and COVID and all the chaos that's happening. What's your hope for the future of work?
Well, my hope is that our leadership, our elected leadership, will write laws that continue to reward work, and that we continue to build workplaces where people feel good about coming to work, where their effort and their commitment to their job are rewarded, not just with pay, but with, I would say, decent respect that all human beings deserve.
Great. Senator, thank you for joining us.
You're welcome. Good luck.
Pleasure.
Hi, my name is Courtney Morris, and I'm a junior studying finance and entrepreneurship at Miami University in Oxford, Ohio. Before beginning my internship this summer, I read a poll saying 96% of students were not equipped for the real world after college. While I hated to disagree with Gallup, I thought I was in that 4% that were ready. About 2 weeks into my internship, I began realizing that I was only using one of the hard skills I had listed on my resume. Instead, what I was using was my ability to be agile and innovative under pressure. And I firmly believe this is why we need to change a few things about the way college operates today. We need to hammer home the importance of curiosity. Allow students to realize that curiosity doesn't stop. Learning doesn't stop whenever you receive a diploma. Secondly, we need to allow room for innovation. Allow students to critically think and teach them how to problem solve beyond a textbook. Lastly, we need to stop teaching to the test. As a straight A student, I know what it's like to get an A on a test. I know exactly what it's like to cram and then forget. And I think that's all too common among college students today. So I don't know about anyone else out there, but I'm sick and tired of being a statistic. Thank you and have a great day.
The work environment has most definitely changed over the last year to 6 months. We continue to utilize new technology platforms for modes of communication. This has allowed us to virtually connect colleagues around the world. My hopes for a future of work are to continue to simplify the work environment through these technology options, yet maintain that one-on-one interaction that can be so beneficial for business success.
So I'm really excited about this next session. I'm going to be talking with Shavar Jeffries. Shavar was the president of the advisory board for Newark Public Schools. He's also the president of the Democrats for Education Reform. They're a group that promotes more charter schools, school funding, and stricter teacher evaluations to revamp public education, fighting every day on a very important front that's critical to the future success of the workforce. He's also a former assistant state attorney general and was a candidate in the 2014 mayoral race in the city of Newark, New Jersey. He's currently a partner at Lowenstein Sandler, a New York-based law firm. I'm excited. Let's get started with Shavar Jeffries.
I guess to kick it off, Shavar, it'd be great for you to maybe just share a little bit about, I guess, what got you into the line of work you're in, obviously across policy and in the legal profession. What made you do it?
Yeah, well, thanks. Yeah, thanks for having me, Sam. Excited to have this conversation. Appreciate all the work you do. What got me into this work, and when I say this work, it's really work at the kind of intersection of civil rights, racial injustice, economic opportunity, education opportunity, is really connected to kind of my upbringing. I'm from Newark, from the South Ward of Newark. Love the city very much. Amazing people in the city, brilliant people, talented people. And as I was growing up, I didn't really have a sense of college. I didn't really have a sense of kind of life beyond Newark. My grandmother was a public school teacher. She really was insistent that education opportunity was kind of the key to, kind of me fulfilling my potential. And even though she was a public school teacher in Newark Public Schools, she felt because of the politics in the system, some of the, frankly, bureaucracy in the system, the inefficiency, and the fact that the system at that point in the 70s and the 80s was significantly underfunded, was severely underfunded. So all of those issues combined, she just felt that the public school system in New York just wasn't aligned with the potential I had inside of me, or frankly, a lot of the potential of the kids in the system generally. So long story short, in 1987, a philanthropist, the great Ray Chambers, who I love, is really a hero to this world, frankly. I mean, the work he's done with the UN and the work he's done not only in Newark, but around the world. He created a scholarship program for about 15 kids in Newark to get scholarships to go to college prep, private high school. So I was one of those kids, and I just saw up close how the type of educational opportunity I had and the rigor and the expectations. So the expectations at Seton Hall Prep, which is where I went to high school, was that every student's going to go to college. And every student's going to go to college and be the best that they could be, not just for themselves, but so that they could be a servant in this world. And I just saw, day by day that I was on a different trajectory because the opportunity I had available to me. And I saw how the kids in my neighborhood didn't have those same opportunities. And so they weren't thinking the same way I was about what college and beyond could mean. So long story short, from there, I'd be the first in family to go to college, let alone law school. And I just decided to become a civil rights attorney because I want to use these skills that I had been given. And that, of course, I had to work very hard to obtain as well, to make sure that other young people in my city had similar opportunities, to make sure some of the inequities and the kind of opportunity gap that people in cities like Newark face, that they were hopefully remediated so that, every American child can have the same opportunity to fulfill their potential. So that's kind of what got me into this work.
I'm excited. I got a bunch of questions to ask you, so don't. I know we got a short window, but I'm excited given all the work you've done. I want to start off with the kind of topic that we're been rapping about throughout this event, and it's future of work. And one of the things that we've been trying to advocate and talk about is that the future of work is not about work or technology; it's about people. From your perspective, I guess, how do you define future of work, or how do you think about it?
Yeah, I think about it in a few ways. One, I'm very aware of the fact that, the labor market is undergoing many transformations right now. And many of these transformations have been, evolving over many years, a couple decades. I mean, obviously, a city like Newark, again, I love Newark, still live here. We used to be a strong manufacturing base in the 60s, 70s. A lot of those jobs left the city into the 80s and 90s. Some of those went overseas. We're very much into, and obviously technology is really disrupting the labor market. And moving much more into a services economy. There's obviously a lot of conversation about technology going to the next level, where a lot of potential blue collar jobs and kind of remote activity, repetitive type jobs could be replaced by technology over time. And so for me, what it really means is making sure that wherever the labor market is going in this next generation, that we're able to equip everyday Americans with the skills that they need in order to obtain good jobs where they can put food on the table and take care of their families. It means for me making sure that we rethink not only K-12 and higher education, but frankly, continuous learning. Because the labor market is changing at a very fast rate, the jobs that exist today may not be the jobs that exist, forget 5 years from now. They may not be the jobs that exist a year from now, maybe a few months from now. And so it also means for me, we have to have a space where adults can receive ongoing continuous learning at an affordable rate, if not free and subsidized by the public sector, so that as the labor market changes, people can obtain the skills they need to be competitive as the labor market transforms. Right now, I just think there's a lot of gaps. I mean, there's a lot of gaps between what high-paying jobs are looking for in terms of skills and competencies and types of skills that many Americans have. We see oftentimes foreign workers are coming in to fill some of those jobs. We see in our political conversation this plays out, right? I mean, you have many middle-aged people, particularly in all parts of the country. You have people in the cities, you have people in the Midwest, in the Rust Belt, where a lot of those manufacturing jobs just aren't there, and people are afraid, right? People are afraid about how they're going to take care of their families. We see opioid use up in the Midwest and in the Southwest. We see in our cities. We see all types, heroin and other types of use up because there's such a despair among many folks. The pandemic is only making this worse. So I really think it's essential that our public sector steps up in a nonpartisan, fact-based way to make sure that there's deep conversation between government and the private sector, where jobs going, where good paying jobs going today and into the future. And then we got to make sure we have a public sector vision that enables people to obtain the skills that they need in order to fulfill those jobs. My fear is too much of the public conversation is very much scapegoating. So rather kind of fact-based, data-based conversation about the labor market and where service sector and technology sectors and frankly just other high-paying jobs are going. We get the blame game. Immigrants are taking my job, or this one is taking my job, and all of that. And that's really just absurd. And that's the kind of politics of division that can keep people distracted from the fact that the labor market is undergoing, dramatic transformations, and we're going to need a kind of evidence-based, calm, objective conversation and set of policies so that we can prepare Americans to deal with that economy.
Well, we have a lot of talent leaders that are going to be attending and watching. They might be a job title like head of learning and development, or head of human resources, head of diversity and inclusion, or head of talent. These roles are responsible for recruiting, onboarding, training, and developing folks. And I found that like sometimes the conversation around what's happening in education, or you just mentioned a bunch of things that are happening in our communities. What would you say to that role inside of an organization? Something that they need to know about the state of education as they think about developing and tapping into their talent.
Yeah, I would really encourage people who are in talent roles to not only think about what I think many already are focused on, which is how to support the kind of internal HR operations, succession planning, professional development for internal staff, obviously working through with management and with subordinates, personnel issues that arise in the workplace, but also to be very intentional about engaging with the public sector, engaging with the university community, engaging with the community colleges in the community where these businesses either are located or where they're pulling talent from or where they're selling services, where the customers are. And really being in deep conversation with those actors in terms of what is it that the company needs today to fill roles that already exist, and where's the company going, right? What types of skills going forward is the company going to project that it's going to need? And we understand, some you don't know what you don't know. Things can change, but many companies do know some things already. So I think it's very important for people-based folks to really be involved in the external conversation around how do we equip future workers with the skills and competencies they need. So as those jobs become available, employers have a ready pool of talent, ideally from the same communities, either where the company is selling its goods and services or where its headquarters are located, so that you kind of get that integration with your community and you frankly get the flywheel, right? Obviously, to the extent a company can find great talent down the road, that's going to make that company more successful. They're going to be able to make more money. And then you, of course, get the double net if you're putting dollars in the pocket of workers in the communities or workers from the communities from which your customers are located. You get that kind of multiplier effect.
Sure. I don't know if you heard, it's an election year, Shavar. Do you know?
No, I didn't hear about that. Is that right?
I guess being an election year, and especially for the folks that are talent or even C-level executives, what are some of the questions that we should be asking or we should be seeking out the answers to when we're looking at candidates and thinking about how they're going to impact labor and education and workforce and the things if we're serious about future of work, what's our line of questions that we should be seeking the answers to?
Yeah, I really think is essential. I mean, obviously there's a set of questions that different businesses will have around, the regulatory environment for their business, and obviously making sure. I mean, obviously the government has a critical role to make sure that the private sector and that the markets work in a reasonable way and aren't predatory. But obviously at the same time, entrepreneurs and innovators need room to innovate. So there's a set of conversation that different businesses will have. But on the labor market side, I really think it's essential for anyone who cares about the future work and the future ability of Americans to be able to have gainful employment, to have the conversation around what is the post-secondary vision that we ought to have as a country, or if you're looking at state candidates or local candidates in your state or in your local community, around preparing our residents for the next generation of work, preparing our residents for the future of work, right? What are those skills we need? We spend a lot of money in this country on post-secondary education at the community college level, at the four-year college and university level. There's likely, there seems to be some bipartisan consensus around making college, whether it's community or four-year and other and career technical training post-high school free or dramatically more affordable. So there's going to be a lot more money probably coming from the federal government to make these programs more affordable. But we have to demand that not only is the money there, and that's obviously an important piece, but that the right vision and execution is there too. Right? We have to have, integrated, organic conversation between companies in terms of what they need and being very clear about that, and then the public sector in terms of matching and aligning those investments where the jobs are going. I tend to think public-private partnerships are the best way to go. I mean, I think the government is very effective as a funder and is reasonably effective in terms of demanding results for those investments. Sometimes there can be challenges when the government is it sets up its own agency to implement, to be frank. I mean, there's a lot to be desired oftentimes with some of the ways in which some of our one-stop job training programs that are run by local or county government. Some people may have a different view. In my experience, they tend not to be that effective. So I tend to like to see public-private partnerships where we can have the job creators of tomorrow, right? Where they can create apprenticeship programs. Maybe the government can fund that. And so as opposed to the government agency actually running the service. So I would say those questions around what is your vision to prepare Americans for the future of work, right? What is your vision for how does the country invest in those training programs so that Americans are ready? Because what we are seeing, I would argue, on one hand, we see one party which tends to focus a lot on putting a lot of money to make training free, or very affordable, which I think is a good conversation. But frankly, less on accountability around results, because we not only want the money spent, it has to work, and it has to be invested wisely. Nor do I oftentimes hear conversation from that side around how to actually deliver in a way that actually ensures that Americans not only get the training, but then they get the job placement. And then sometime on the other side, we hear too much, frankly, of a zero-sum conversation. So rather than a fact-based, honest conversation about how technology is disrupting the labor market, how a lot of the jobs of yesterday may not exist tomorrow. I mean, that truck driving job may not be here 10 years from now, may not be here 5 years from now. Many of those jobs in manufacturing plants, to the extent some still exist, may not be here. And it's not because an immigrant or somebody of another racial category is taking some from you. It's because the whole labor market is changing. So let's get you ready for that, right? So that can be maybe a harder conversation, but it's the truthful conversation. So we need a truthful, honest conversation. We got to get away from the zero sum, one group against another, because frankly, if you're a working person or a working poor person, you have so much more in common with everybody else who's a working person than any of these other categories that people are always putting in folks' face. So I would encourage people to focus on the facts of where's the labor market going? How do we get Americans ready for it? How do we hold government investments accountable to make sure people actually be in place and are in jobs where they can put food on the table and take care of their families?
I was watching Representative John Lewis's procession today in DC, and I want to ask you this, given your experience, like the phrase "good trouble." What kind of good trouble should we be getting in if we're leaders that are trying to create a more inclusive, more equitable workforce? What are the things that you would say to leaders out there?
I would say, and that's a great, of course, John Lewis is such a great model. And people should remember, he was first arrested and sent to prison because he just wanted to use a bathroom at a bus stop in Jackson, Mississippi, that was for white people. So he just wanted to pee, right? And just peeing in a certain type of bathroom was subversive, 56 years ago, not even that long ago, right? This is the early 1960s. And then, of course, he was most famous for being beaten brutally for simply walking across a bridge saying Black people should be able to vote in the South, right? And so which I would argue is just the fundamentals, right? To be able to actually use a public restroom and not be discriminated against because of the color of your skin, or to actually be able to cast a ballot in the country that claims, to be the most successful democracy in the world. And so what I think that means for us today when it comes to inclusion is any of us in positions of authority who are hiring people, who are purchasing goods and services from vendors, you got to have a diverse workforce, right? And if you don't, it's probably a reflection of implicit bias, right? I think most human beings are good people and want to do the right thing. I don't. There are some who are just explicitly and consciously biased against people of different races. I think more often than not, it's more of the implicit unconscious bias, and there's a lot of research that speaks to that. And that just deals with the fact that as Americans, we grow up in a culture in which these biases are just there. They're just baked in, right? I mean, the reason why, not even 60 years ago, it was so problematic for John Lewis to use a restroom that wasn't designated for him was because, of course, the whole cultural idea was these Black people aren't human beings, right? That was the whole point. That was the point for slavery, right? They're not human beings, so they can be enslaved. That was a point for racial apartheid and segregation, Jim Crow, up until literally 1970. I mean, this was legal in this country until the Fair Housing Act in 1968. It was because these are different types of people. So when you have that just kind of in the groundwater, none of us should feel. You're gonna have these biases. Black people have them, all types of people have them. Like, sometimes people get very defensive. It's just in the kind of groundwork, right? I mean, I'm an honors grad of Duke University, academic scholarship. When I was walking around campus, people never thought I had an academic scholarship. I can't count how many times, hey man, what do you play? Right? Because there's just images in our culture about who should be doing what. And so the point is, if we want to be inclusive, we first have to do the work of anti-racism within ourselves and within our organizations. There's all types of tremendous consultants who can help organizations with that. And then as we're doing that work, you just have to look at who are you hiring? Who are you hiring in positions of power and authority? Where are you buying your goods and services from, right? So it's not just who you hire, but who are your vendor relationships? Who are your lawyers? Who are your accountants? Who provide your professional services? And if you're looking around and you're not seeing equity in that, you probably got some work to do in terms of anti-racism. Because what will happen is when you don't do the work, it can be easily rationalized and say, well, I can't find people. Which just they're there. People just can't see them oftentimes because these biases, will get in the way. And then the last thing I'll say about the great thing is when you do the work, you're actually going to be a better organization, right? Your work is going to be better, right? So it's not, I would argue on one hand it's the right thing to do, but maybe even more importantly, you're just going to be better, right? You're just going to be better. My grandfather used to always tell me the story. My grandfather played in the Negro Leagues, and always tell me the story about how Branch Rookie came and saw Josh Gibson and Jackie Robinson, because at that point, people may or may not remember, at that point, the thought was, well, these Black people just aren't smart and strategic enough to play baseball at a high level, right? So that was the idea, right? They just can't do it, right? Which again is unsurprising when you have the racial history of who Black people were. And of course, Branch Rickey brought in Jackie, in part, not really because he was trying to be some bold person. He's like, I want to go win games. And this kid, Jackie Robinson, is one of the best players I saw. And of course, Jackie quickly comes in the league, becomes MVP, Dodgers win championship. And so part of it is, I don't even make the appeals in terms of some ethical claim, although I think that's there. It's like, you want to win, there's all this talent right out there. And I do think sports is an interesting space because sports, it's so, a lot of bias can play out there, no question. But at a certain point, it can be just so obvious how good people are that it's hard for the biases to deny, greatness, although, they still play a role. And it's like anything else, right? If you only recruit from the state of New Jersey, where I'm from, you'll get certain talent. You recruit from the country, you'll get more talent. You recruit from the world, you get even more. And if you got, 35% of the population in terms of people of color that you're not recruiting from, you're just going to be worse off. So you got to decide, do you want to be the best or do you want to be less than the best?
Sure. It's great, Shavar. I'm asking everybody this one final question for you. So no pressure in this one. What is your hope for the future of work?
That's a great question. My real hope is that the future of work, of course, supports transformational innovations in our world that enable people to live better lives. whether it's transformations in healthcare that allow people to live longer, whether it's other types of interventions that just improve the quality of life of human beings, right? So one, I just hope work is connected to just a better quality of life and better living for human beings, right? So that's number one. So it's beyond just, owners of companies making money, and there's nothing wrong with that. But it's also that what we do in the labor market and what companies do and what employers do actually makes our lives better. And then secondly, that the future of work happens in a way that the average human being in this world can find work that's fulfilling for that person, and that enables that person to carve out, a quality life as that person would define it. And for me, at minimum, they're able to purchase the fundamental goods and services that I believe human beings should be entitled to. Some shelter, the ability to access healthcare when they're sick, although I also think that, a lot of arguments about how that you shouldn't have to purchase that should just be a guarantee. The ability to, put some food on the table for your families, be able to have some recreational ability to just enjoy. So really for me, that work is connected to making people's lives better, and that everyday human beings can find work that's fulfilling and, economically rewarding for that person.
Shavar, I took a page of notes here, man. I really appreciate you sharing your points of view with us today. Thank you.
Thank you. My pleasure. Thanks for having me.